And Pogba leaves for McTominay! Magnificent! It's Moraes, he's done it again! He has fizzed that into the bottom corner. Vardy for Chowdhury. And set for Madison! He is one bright young thing! Alisson saw Salah running from his own half, so onside here, Mo Salah. Salah to settle it! In front of the Kop! There's no feeling like that feeling! And now you've got to believe them. You have got to believe them.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the 3PL podcast. Thank you again to everyone for tuning in each week. Another action-packed weekend to cover, and we'll get straight into it. Starting with Crystal Palace versus Newcastle last Friday night. Not the most eventful game, but a really big result for Newcastle, really. And a very late show as well. 2 goals within the last 5 minutes to seal the points. And the tail of the tape again was unfortunately for Crystal Palace that they just failed to function without Wilfried Zaha. And God, Crystal Palace are terrible to watch this season.
This game really sums up exactly what Angus was saying last week and a few weeks ago as well about how valuable Zaha is to Palace and why he is more valuable to them than he is to anyone else, because he really runs that team from what we can see now. Don't think there was a moment in that game where I thought Palace looked like they were going to be on top or actually going to win the game. It looked like it was heading for a 0-0, to be honest. And so I don't think Newcastle were great either. They just took their 2 chances right at the end and ended up with a scoreline that really flattered them. But it was, in my opinion, destined for a really boring 0-0 if it weren't for just a good bit of clinical finishing from Wilson at the end, and then obviously Joe Linton getting a goal after we all said how terrible he was last week.
Yeah, it's almost Sod's law that he comes back to strikers like that. I have to say, it's a huge result for Newcastle. I think they needed to just keep that early season form they had, which was up and down, but they need to keep getting the results. Palace, on the other hand, they're dropping. Like you said, without Zaha, they are nothing, really. They're a very, really poor team, and their style of football is shocking. A lot of me kind of wants them to fall into that battle, that relegation battle, because I think that's actually where they deserve to be, especially the way that the style of football they play is just horrendous.
Yes, it's poor to watch, start to finish. And although Crystal Palace had a fair few chances in this game, I think they had around 10 shots in total, but they didn't really worry Carl Darlow, and even when they did, I thought Darlow was in great form, and he has been for Newcastle this season. So at least Newcastle had that to fall back on. And then the 2 players up front you expect to be the danger people, and they weren't for the large majority of the game. But then Wilson and Joe Linton, they pair up in the last 5 minutes to get goals to win the game. And fair play to Joe Linton. He had a really good game and got the assist and then got a goal for himself. So all of that criticism and stick they gave him last week, maybe he tuned in, maybe he listened, maybe took our advice on board, who knows. But either way, it worked, and a good result for Steve Bruce. And Roy Hodgson's got a lot of thinking to do after this one, because he can't keep playing this system and expecting it to work the same way when Zaha's in the team, because who knows when he's coming back. And if they keep fielding teams like this and getting results like this, I don't think he's got that much longer in this job.
The insane part about the league at the moment is if Newcastle pick up another win and results go their way, they can jump straight up to 5th. Severely doubt it with their goal difference, but the league is so tight at the moment. Like, Palace are falling back, Newcastle jumping up. In a couple of weeks' time, we could be at a place where Newcastle could be in the top 5. I doubt it, but it's there to be done.
Right, up next we had Brighton versus Liverpool. A really action-packed game, actually, and I don't think many of us expected it to go the way it did. But from my point of view, I thought Brighton were massively unlucky not to be well ahead in this game quite early on. They had some really good early chances, and they really took advantage of what was quite a weak defence that Liverpool fielded. And if it wasn't for some poor finishing and a missed penalty, they should have been maybe 2-0 up at half-time. And, they end up getting a point out of the game, but this wasn't a vintage Liverpool performance, and rightfully or wrongly, they did get a penalty at the end, but I think Brighton definitely deserved to get something out of this game.
I think this has taken us back to what we were speaking about last week, when a lot of us predicted that Liverpool were going to start struggling with the injuries they're having in that back line, and we definitely saw it in this match. They're not as confident on the ball. They're also not as confident actually as a unit. There was gaps all over the place when Brighton was attacking. We've got to give them credit, though. They were fantastic in the way they play, and I really enjoy watching them. Sadly, a lot of this season, they haven't got the results which they've deserved for the endeavour they put into their matches, but they got the result which I think they deserved. I think potentially, like you said, Matt, they probably should have won it.
I think it's a shame again that this game's kind of been marred by a number of controversial VAR decisions. Obviously, 2 offside goals for Liverpool disallowed, both marginal, one more than the other. And then obviously the penalty at the end. The way we're going with penalties this season, it was a penalty. That was definitely going to get given. It was almost identical to the one that Liverpool got against West Ham, where Mo Salah's foot was the one that was kicked. And I didn't hear Klopp having a hissy fit about it that time. But obviously this time he's very unhappy with the way the decisions have gone. You can see why, but then, if at least we're getting some consistency with those decisions. In terms of the performance from them, I have to say, I think Liverpool were unlucky. It was a good performance from Brighton. They played very well. But on another day when those marginal offsides go their way, a couple of millimetres here or there, it's a fairly comfortable win for Liverpool. So I don't see it being a sign that they're going to struggle in the next few games. If anything, I think they've done incredibly well considering the injuries they've had to still be competitive and realistically looking like they should have won that game.
Although, interestingly, tonight, Alisson has been left out of the lineup in the Europe. If that's a sign that he's picked up another injury, I don't know the exact details, but that could be a huge worry for them because, like we saw last time, Adrian is definitely just nowhere near on his level.
Yeah, and aside from those injuries, you look at the starting back 4 that they had in this game with Phillips and Williams at the back, and if you see those 2 people starting and you're playing them in that game, like Brighton were in the dressing room before this match, I mean, obviously you're going to target them, and that's exactly what they did. And Nico Williams gives away a poor penalty, and I think he kind of showed his inexperience at this level. And then, the penalty at the end, I guess it doesn't look great when you watch it back. It kind of looks like Welbeck made the most of it because he knew he had to. And if that's going to be something that we see more of, I'm not really a fan of it because to me it seems like Welbeck felt the contact, took a couple of seconds to himself to be like, oh, I've been kicked here, but I don't need to go down, then realised that VAR is going to be checking it. So he was like, okay, just to consolidate, to make sure we get this penalty, I'm going to go down. And that's kind of why the penalty got given in the end. And I can see why Jurgen Klopp was aggrieved that that's the way it came around. But from my point of view, I thought it had to be a penalty. And rightly or wrongly, I mean, they're going to get given this season. Like I said, I think it's what Brighton deserved in this game, even though it came in a bit of an unfortunate manner.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's rightly or wrongly, those are going to get given. And I think most people would say you don't want to see those given. But if that's how it's going to be, we've got to get used to it. And unfortunately, as a manager, I don't think you can be sort of trying to take sort of the side of, our team's being unfairly penalised for this. You're going to get some for you, you're going to get some against you. Moving on to the next game of the weekend, which was very refreshing in the sense that it was just more of a sort of vintage Man City performance, very little controversy, a very impressive performance from Man City, who demolished Burnley 5-0.
Yeah, you know what? It's strange because for the last couple of weeks, actually, since the season's even started, we haven't seen this Man City. Last season, we got used to seeing it so often when they were beating teams 3-4-0 at home, going away and putting goals past opponents. But this season, it just hasn't happened for some reason. But this seemed like a return to form, return to what they do best. Everyone on that team did their job and they made it look really comfortable against a very below par Burnley team. But again, you've got to credit the players. Mahrez, I thought, had an insane game, hat-trick. His finishing was top-notch. And Kevin De Bruyne as well, 2 assists, just ran the show as he always does. And the fact that Angus predicted a 0-0 in this game still surprises me.
Yeah, I was just about to mention, how wrong could I be? It was so predictable when you look at the form sheets. This is the Man City which always seems to turn up against Burnley, and at the same side, the Burnley which always fails to turn up against Man City. It was an absolute spanking. Mahrez was showing the form which I don't think he shows enough throughout the season. He definitely has it in his locker. He's an incredible player. I think that's a mixture of both. Pep, he loves to rotate his front players, and I think Mahrez is the type of player who needs the games. He needs to keep his form up. He needs to be playing week in, week out, and I think sometimes he struggles as a result of that. But when he's on song, when he's like that, he's one of the best players to watch in the league. I love watching it. He can cut in on his left. His finishing is brilliant. What a player. And again, Kevin De Bruyne in the middle of the pitch, just pulling all the strings.
Yeah, Kevin De Bruyne in that game was just back to his absolute best. The assists he got were brilliant, and I think he was incredibly unlucky not to get more, and even a goal himself of some of the chances he had. You could easily have been seeing a sort of 3 assists, 2 goals kind of performance from him there if the ball had gone his way a couple of times. If he can keep that form going, that could be what Man City need to sort of kick on from this game and get back to the best that even if you're not a Man City fan, you have to enjoy watching their games. I think this one really reminded me of that game where they beat Stoke 7-1 a few seasons ago, and it was just some of the best football I've seen in the Premier League was played in that game. And they did the same in this. So I hope for the sake of the league that we see more of it. And I'm sure Burnley will be hoping to see a lot less of it next time they play them, because that can't have been a nice experience for any of their players or their fans or any of the coaching staff or anyone associated with the club, really.
Yeah, one man who particularly suffered, I think, in this game was the goalkeeper, Peacock Farrell. I think he made his debut in this game in the Premier League. And what a game to make your debut, really. I mean, it's a bit harsh throwing him in at the deep end against Man City. And he was actually pretty lucky that VAR ruled out one of the goals that Man City scored, because he made a pretty awful error where the ball bounced back off his knee and into the back of the goal. So, to be honest, I think it will be a day to forget for Burnley. And I think they'll need to get over it pretty quickly, because their form hasn't been great this season anyway. So if they let this get to them, then it's not going to be good for them. But yeah, you've got to credit City, credit Pep. And yeah, maybe this is a return of the Man City we're used to seeing. Right, up next we have Everton versus Leeds, a game that we predicted to be really close, full of goals, and probably everything that happened in the match suggested that should have been the case, but the goals just wouldn't go in. So many chances in this game. I think there are a total of 35 goal attempts in this game, which is kind of crazy as a stat. Only one of them went in, and yeah, I mean, Leeds looked pretty good value for their win in the end, but I think for a large majority of the game, Everton were in it, had good chances, but Meslier, again, had a really good game and goal for Leeds, and he's looking like a great goalkeeper. Fair play to Leeds. We've seen all kinds of form from Leeds this season, the poor, the good. And, this was a really good battling performance against an Everton side who have been blowing away most teams in the league this season. So, yeah, Leeds are establishing themselves as a very strong team this season.
Yeah, I wonder if that's some sort of record, surely. That number of attempts on goal with only one goal in the entire match must be up there anyway, because that's extraordinary. It is a shame that we didn't get the goal fest that we were expecting, but what we did get, obviously, was a very exciting game, in the sense of the more the game went on, the more you got the feeling that one goal would probably be enough to settle it. And both teams looked like they could have been the team to get it at various points in the game. But yeah, Leeds once again showing that defensively they can compete. It didn't look like they could in their first couple of the games of the season, where I think they conceded 9 goals over the first 2 games they played, I think. Now they're really starting to show their sort of organisation, their structure again. The only thing they seem to be lacking is fortunes have gone the other way at the other end of the pitch as well. I think Bamford started off the season looking great, and now I saw a stat that he's missed 9 big chances this season already, more than any other player in the league. If you're a promoted team and you're relying on someone as a talisman like they do with him up front, you can't be affording to be missing that many of the chances that your teammates are making for you.
Yeah, I've mentioned before that Bamford wasn't the finisher I think Leeds need, especially in such a difficult league. And I think it's been very clear to see in the last couple of weeks he's really struggling to find the back in that after he's had some really clear-cut chances. And in this game, he was particularly poor, I would say, in front of goal. His build-up play and the way he gets around the pitch is good, but I would expect you have to be bagging a chance. He got away with it, Rafinha, with a really good finish. It almost looked like when he went to take the shot, he was like, oh, crap, there's no one to actually pass to. Oh, well, whatever, I'll have a go. And he finished it really well.
Yeah, I think the criticism of Bamford's maybe a little bit unfair. In this game, I thought he had enough chances, but if anything, Pickford denied him really, really well in a couple of opportunities. And you look at Bamford and what he's done in the past for Leeds and in the Premier League in general this season, I think he's been generally a lot better than what people expected. So, yes, he's not going to get 20 goals a season or be that player for them, but for what they need right now as a promoted club, I think he will get them enough goals to justify starting the games. And I think that's all you can really ask for at this level, especially from him, who doesn't have a great goal record, as we've seen previously in the Premier League with Middlesbrough. But yeah, for Leeds, this was a really, really big win. And, if you're going to win away at Everton, I think that shows your intent for the season ahead. And, Leeds look like they're going to cause a lot of teams problems this season.
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of result that as a promoted team, you look at and you think that's the kind of result that is going to show that we're going to stay in the league. You don't win those games if you're not a team that's got the capability to grind out a result and get that 1-0 win away from home when you need to. Leeds fans will be really pleased looking at that, because at the very least it means hopefully they'll be still in the Premier League by the time we get fans back to full capacity stadiums. And as we've said a few times already on this podcast, I think we all can't wait to see Elland Road absolutely full of fans again and rocking with a good Friday night game or something next time that they're allowed in there.
Maybe that's a similar case for Everton, who are lacking the fans currently at Goodison. And you look at their current form now, they've lost 4 of their last 5, and they started their season so well. It's almost been a season of 2 halves for them. They started with the first 5 games doing their best football from what I've seen the last couple of seasons, and then the last 5, they've lost 4 of them. And it's kind of almost like, where do they go now? Do they go up the table and try and push for those European spots, which I'm sure their fans want? Or are they going to get lost in the shuffle again, like they have done probably for the last 4 or 5 seasons? It's just a balancing act, I guess, for Ancelotti, and it'll be very interesting to see whether he can get the best out of this team, because on paper it's a very good team, but as we've seen recently, they've just not been picking up the results.
Moving on to a game where both teams need a result. West Brom, Sheffield United, and West Brom were the team to pick it up, with Gallagher getting a goal. 1-0, massive victory for their season.
Yeah, it was a decent result for West Brom. Whether they deserved it or not, I'm not too sure, because you look at the stat sheet and Sheffield United created more than enough to get something out of this game. But again, it's the same old tale for Sheffield United this season. They just can't find the back of the net, no matter what team they field, who they play in what position. It's just not working for them. And again, they went without Brewster in their starting lineup. They went with McBurney and Oliver Burke, and it just didn't work again. Whether it's something to do with tactics or something else, we're not too sure at this point. But something fundamentally is wrong with Sheffield United. And as wrong as that was, Johnston, again, I say it every week now for West Brom, but he's continuing to be one of the brightest stars in this West Brom team. He's kept them in so many games this season, and again, he kept out everything that Sheffield United had in this game and really helped West Brom get over the line. And yeah, again, massive 3 points for West Brom, and where this leaves Sheffield United is, who knows?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one for Sheffield United because, as you said, Matt, they did create a lot of chances in this game. They just couldn't finish them. You'd have to think, though, that at some point, those chances are going to turn into goals. They created quite a few chances against West Ham the week before, the same again, and came away with nothing. Eventually, the ball's got to get into the back of the net at some point, surely, and they'll pick up a win or a draw somewhere that's vital to them. But the danger is, and you don't often say this after 10 games into a Premier League season, but the danger is with any sort of picking up a win here or there, is that too little too late already for them? 1 point from 10 games. I mean, I think I said to both of you over the weekend, I think that they're on track for 3.8 points this season. If you look at that over the course of a season, which would be by far and away the worst of any team ever. Obviously, that's not likely to be what they actually end up with. But if their fortunes don't turn, they're going to really struggle to get those points from anywhere. And it's going to be a really long season for them if they carry on sort of grinding out these really low-scoring, uneventful and unrewarding games.
The real sad thing to see is at the moment, Chris Wilder's currently gone into the position of being the favourite to be sacked. He's now at 2-1 in the betting odds, and he did such a great job with them last season. And I think if he'd managed to find the striker to get the goals which they need throughout this season, we could be looking at a different thing again. Like, obviously last season, their system, and I think the fans, I think they're a team, they're the type of team which really need to have their fans behind them, managed to get a lot of the results, whereas a mixture of bad luck and bad finishing, it's really affecting their season.
Yeah, it's difficult to see where a win's going to come from as well. Actually, they've made the joint worst start to a Premier League season with 2 other clubs, Man City in 1995 and Sheffield Wednesday in 1999. But you would think with 1 point through 10 games, we're a quarter of the way through the season now, and nothing really looks like changing. And if they don't start scoring goals, like Peter said, like, it is just predictable what's going to happen. They're going to get left behind everyone else, and it's relegation. But, you would think eventually Brewster's going to start most of these games and he'll be able to score some goals. But right now, it doesn't look likely. And for Sheffield United, I just don't see where the wins are coming from. I've looked at their fixtures the next couple of games, and they're playing the likes of Leicester, Southampton, Manchester United, Brighton, and then after that they've got Everton. All these teams have had good form recently in the Premier League. They're not going to be easy games for anyone. So if they can't get points out of those next 5 games, they're going to be bottom at Christmas, and they're probably not going to have more than 5 points, which is abysmal.
Are either of you brave enough to think that they could be down by February?
I genuinely think they could be. You might remember I said a couple of weeks ago about their fixtures, and it was just before the West Ham game, actually, and I said, I know it sounds like a stupid thing to say, but you look at their fixtures and you think they could still be on 1 point come Christmas, which is not looking that implausible now. If that's the case, then surely, February could actually be the time that the season ends for them. Could be the earliest relegation ever.
Yeah, it wouldn't at all surprise me either. We saw them spend big money in the summer as well. With I think Brewster came in for 27, and then Ramsdale was a good 21, I think, million. So they're not going to have too much money to spend in January to turn this team around. And without that financial backing, with the team they currently have, I just don't see it. So I don't think they'll get relegated in February, but I think they'll be the first to be relegated in March. All right, moving on. Southampton, Manchester United, a game we were full of hope for as Southampton fans going into this. We had some good form, 7 unbeaten, came up against a Manchester United who are notoriously very good away from home. And the first half went really well. And the less said about the second, the better. But Southampton go on to lose the game 3-2 after being 2-0 up at half-time. And I don't want to dwell on it, but it was just a very typical Southampton performance, really. Not killing the game off and letting a team who have a lot of attacking quality come into the game, and at the end, I really feel like we bottled it.
Yeah, sadly, last season we were the team which threw away the most points from a winning position, and it looks like we're having a good go at trying to do that again. It was such a frustrating match because at 2-0 up, James Ward-Prowse is playing absolutely fantastically. We're looking pretty solid. We're starting to pass the ball really well. And then not for the first time this season. We came out the second half and just seemed to drop away, forgot how to play, because we did the same against Spurs. Spurs, we dominated them the first half and then conceded 4 goals in the second half. In this game, 3 goals. I think one of the biggest issues we have is once our confidence drops, our passing just becomes appalling. We're missing passes from 3-4 yards. I know times when I was just like, just put your foot through it, get a bit more force on the ball, get it to your man, and we just didn't seem to be able to do it.
Yeah, just like to remind you both of the looks of incredulity in your face when I predicted a 3-1 win to Man United at the end of last episode. You both looked horrified at that suggestion that might happen, but obviously, these things come true every now and then. It wasn't. Honestly, I didn't see it go in the way that it did. I have to admit, at half-time, 2-0 to Southampton, I was thinking it looked like a really comfortable win. So I couldn't really believe the fact that it ended up 3-2 to Man United. I think it's not a sign of things to be worried about for Southampton in the way that it was last season. This is coming from obviously a West Ham fan who I think we threw away the second most points from winning positions last year, and actually have thrown away more points from winning positions than any other team in the Premier League since August 2019, I think. So, I know what it's like. I've been in that situation myself many times. I don't see the real warning signs in that Southampton team of a team that's going to do that week in, week out this season. I think it's very different from where you were last year.
Yeah, fundamentally, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with this performance other than we just gave up in the second half. But we did play well enough in the first half to probably have put the game away. I think we probably could have scored one more and 3-0 at half-time, and you look at a completely different game. But the fact we were only 2-0 up at half-time, and then they have the ability to bring on someone like Cavani from the bench, just shows the difference in class between us, really, as two teams. And are we really expected to compete with a team who can bring on a striker the quality of Cavani? Probably not. So the fact that we were punching above our weight for so long in this game is a really good sign. But again, we've seen it before with Southampton. You can see the one goal, and then all of a sudden the confidence goes. And actually, strikers like Cavani, we've seen in the past, are almost our kryptonite as Southampton fans and as a Southampton defence. We've seen it in the past with Giroud, big physical strikers. We just don't seem to know how to defend against them. And unfortunately, Man United clocked onto that pretty quickly. And Cavani was, almost unplayable at times. And he only got into 2 good situations, but there were 2 situations where there should have been a defender there, and he just had a free header. So, yeah, it's disappointing. But when you think about the quality on the pitch and how much money they spent on their team and the quality of players they brought onto the pitch, I don't think you can be too upset. Yes, it would have been nice to get a result out of this game, but, we're still 5th in the league, so a bit of perspective. And, I think we'll be fine.
Like you say, the biggest difference is the bench in this game. We had Shane Long to come on, and we were making all our subs really late into the match. And we just don't have especially with Redmond struggling with injuries, Ings out, we just don't have the players who we can bring in to really strengthen that team. We still have our centre-back, who's our big signing in the summer, who we've not managed to bed into the team yet. He's still suffering with some unknown injury. I'm not 100% sure what it is. I don't know if it's a mental thing or a physical thing, but we've not managed to get him fit yet and ready for a match. We still have players to come back, which I think when they do, we'll start looking stronger. We might start to finish games off in a better way. So I think at the moment, the fact that we can't bring anyone on and we play such a high intensity, aggressive style of football, that's going to tire them out. And by 60, 70 minutes, we've seen the impact of not being able to bring on anyone of near or equal standard to the players which we have on the pitch.
Yeah, that'll make a huge difference for us, having those players to come on when we need them the most, when our players are putting in such a shift that they probably need resting after 60 minutes. But again, I thought it was a really good insight from Raul Passanito after the game. He said that Man United were celebrating from their dressing rooms like they'd won the league. Apparently the noise was that loud coming from their dressing room. And I think that says a lot about the performance that we put in and how much they valued this victory against us. And, we're not supposed to be competing for a Premier League. They are, but they still value it as a really, really big win. So as much as it's disappointing to lose the game, I think there are plenty of positives to take out of it. Right, up next we had Chelsea-Tottenham, two teams who are probably going to be at the top of the league come the end of the season, if not battling for the title. And, it wasn't the best game, to be honest. I think everyone thought that there'd be, a lot of action in this game, a lot of good chances, a lot of goals, if anything, and it just didn't play out that way. I think Spurs came into it with a very defensive mindset. They didn't want to get caught out. They didn't want to make any mistakes. I think they sacrificed some of their attacking play to get away with that. But Chelsea, again, didn't really create too much. And it was a weird game, really, because you'd expect both teams to go at each other, but it kind of felt like Chelsea wanted to win more than Tottenham. And I think Chelsea will be more disappointed with a point than Spurs will.
They definitely will. I think Spurs, for them, that point was a lot more of an acceptable result, especially, as we've said before, they played on Thursday, whereas Chelsea had played on Tuesday in the Champions League. So Chelsea had an extra 2 days to prepare for that game. I almost was disappointed with Lampard for not seeing that as a great opportunity to get a win over his former manager. It's Lampard against Mourinho. It should be a huge, huge opportunity for Lampard. And especially with the extra 2 days to prepare for it, I can't see why they didn't look more up for it and more like they wanted to win the game. He looked so determined not to be beaten that I didn't see any sort of real intention to go and get the 3 points, which is disappointing as a spectator in general, because you look at this game on the fixture list as one that's going to be really exciting, and unfortunately it just wasn't. It was a real letdown. On the other side of that, Chelsea defensively just continuing to look really, really solid now since Mendy's come in, and just the defence in general is really coming together. They've got a great defensive record over the last few games, defending at the same levels as we saw that season. I think, was it 2004 when Mourinho first came in and they conceded hardly any goals all season? They're on that kind of track at the moment, so it's going to look like it's going to be really difficult for anybody to score against them. You just hope that they can look at that and go, well, we're really solid at the back. Let's go out and win these games rather than just relying on the defence to hold on to a point.
Yeah, I don't think it's all down to Chelsea not wanting the game enough. I thought at times, especially, Werner had some pretty good runs, pretty attempts at trying to get in behind. But I think Jose set up that team the way I think I kind of predicted that he would do. It was a very pragmatic approach, which I think you expect from Jose in big games. I would have thought they would have nicked it. Just would have been such a Jose thing to do, especially if it'd come late, like 85th minute, just a Harry Kane to nod on from a corner or something and just to steal it. Because looking at the stats, just to give it a real impression of what the game was like, they had one shot on target the whole game, which for a team with the quality of Spurs have up front, I think isn't good enough, really. I think they should be challenging Chelsea's goal more than that. I think Chelsea definitely put a lot more effort into trying to get the win than Spurs. I know, obviously, Jose comes with the approach which you'd expect and has served them so well, but at times you want them to push on and try and get that big win, because I think every 3 points this season is going to be valuable, because a lot of teams are going to keep dropping them, and Spurs definitely have a chance to win the league.
Yeah, and Chelsea could have easily won this game as well. At the end, we saw Joe Rodon, who was making his first Premier League appearance for Tottenham, make a pretty poor mistake heading the ball back to Lloris, and maybe a striker a bit more in form than Olivier Giroud on the other end of that mistake, and it would have been a goal for Chelsea, but Giroud couldn't quite sort his feet out, and it ended up being pretty comfortable save for Lloris. But chances like that where you would think, if you take those, they are very, very important in the title race. So yeah, probably a point or 2 points dropped for Chelsea, but great result for Spurs, and it keeps them top of the league at least for another week. So
yeah, Spurs are the top of the league, but And the other team in North London, it's not looking good at all. Arsenal suffered yet another defeat, this time against Wolves, another home defeat. I don't know about you guys, but I watched this Arsenal team and they just look so average compared to what you expect from a team of their size. It almost feels like we're just saying the same things every week at the moment about them. That nothing has changed since we criticised them a few weeks ago for some of their poor defeats. They still look like they can't create anything. They still look shaky defensively. They still look like they don't have a handle over their midfield. There's just so much wrong with this team. You know, we had that question a couple of weeks ago, you know, who would you sign if you had the full backing and all the money in the world? I almost wonder whether that would even be enough at the moment. There's so many things that need to change. That's not to take any of the credit away from Wolves, who I think played really well and deserved the win. But, you know, it's hard to take anything else away from this game other than the fact that Arsenal were just absolutely awful again.
Yeah, it's a bit of a result marred by a really bad injury. Obviously, we saw with Raul Jimenez going off pretty early with what's turned out to be a fractured skull, which is, you know, one of the worst injuries you can probably suffer in terms of being a football player. We've seen players in the past not return after that, but we hope Jimenez returns for Wolves, so we've seen how important he can be for them. But in terms of the performance, and for Wolves especially, I thought after that, and most teams, you know, could crumble after seeing your best player go off with a really serious injury, but Wolves almost did the opposite, and it spurred them on. And they played so well in that first half to go ahead. And yeah, as for Arsenal, I mean, yes, they got the equaliser after Wolves scored, but after that, they offered absolutely nothing. I mean, like, fuck all. And for an Arsenal team with the attacking quality that they have, it's pretty abysmal, to be honest. We've got Aubameyang up there who looks like he doesn't care anymore after signing his big money contract in the summer. And the rest of that team, there's not one player there who you'd expect the goals to come from. And Wolves rightfully won the game. They deserved to. Yes, they didn't have the possession in the game, but they created way more opportunities. But for Arsenal, I just don't know where they go from here. They're slap bang in the middle of the table and they're falling quickly. And if Arteta doesn't get a grip on this team, and I don't think it's going to be that easy, you know, he's going to be really struggling, as we've said before. But yeah, there's so much wrong with this team.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth in terms of Wolves. Credit it's due to them for managing to keep their head straight after such a horrific injury to Jimenez. Teams can crumble under the pressure of seeing someone who they good friends with go off the pitch in such a bad way. But no, they worked really hard, and for one of the first times this season, they got goals in the first half, which that's made such an impact in them winning the game. Because Arsenal, like you said, were abysmal, and I'm actually surprised that Arteta's not further up in the betting odds to be the next manager to be sacked. Is at 10-1, and people like Steve Bruce is ahead of him, who's in my eyes is doing a better job than him. Like Arteta is, I think he needs to make some changes. Earlier on in the season, they had a grit, they had something which they were managed to grind out games, but I might have been almost deluded and given him more credit than he deserved. I think it was more than having a grit and grinding out games. It was they were almost getting lucky with the results because their attacking style end of their game has been abysmal. They can't put passes together well. They can't break teams down. One of the worst Arsenal teams I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, well, Newcastle have got one more point than Arsenal at the moment, so how Steve Bruce is more likely to be sacked than Arteta, I don't know. One thing that stood out for me, and I want to be careful with saying this because it's not, you know, I don't want to pick out a young, potentially very talented player and put the blame on him. It's almost more the fact that he's been put in that position. But you look at that sort of the lineup for Arsenal in that number 10 row with Joe Willock playing in there as a number 10. Okay, he's young, he's 21, he's talented. You'd expect, you know, he deserves a chance in the Premier League. But I was just having a quick look. He's had 34 appearances in the Premier League so far, and he's got 1 goal and 1 assist. And yet he's starting for Arsenal in their number 10 role, one of the biggest clubs in England, famous for their attacking, skillful play, build-up play, intricate passes through. And yet they're relying on Joe Willock to make things happen from the middle of the pitch. And then, you know, without wanting to go over old ground of what we've said on previous episodes, they've got Mesut Ozil sitting on 300 grand a week, not even in the Premier League squad. You've got to wonder what's going on behind the scenes there to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I was just about to say, come January, he's almost going to be forced to play his hand. He's almost going to be forced to either sell Ozil or play him, because at the moment he's only got 2 choices. He can't keep him unregistered and at the club. It doesn't make any sense to anyone. And yeah, Joe Willock's not going to do the same job that Ozil does. So yeah, I mean, all these questions have to be answered, and I think it's going to be very difficult for Arteta to answer them at the moment. And also, another thing that came out of this game was that it was their 7th game in a row that they haven't kept a clean sheet, which apparently is their worst run since 2007. Something that Arsenal just aren't notorious for is conceding a lot of goals, and recently it's all they've been doing. So again, another player they've not registered for this Premier League season is William Saliba, who they signed last season, sent him out on loan, and he was expected to come back this year and play a big part in Arsenal's defence, but he wasn't registered either. So 2 players you would think should be in the starting lineup haven't been registered, and it's basically all Arteta's fault. And it's easy to overlook stuff like that because he's only been at the club for almost less than a year. But these big decisions, yes, they get made behind the scenes, but they could almost cost him his job just through isolating certain players from his matchday squad, and it's kind of crazy.
Turn kind of more the viewpoint onto Wolves again. I think it's interesting that one of their better performances this season has come from one. They've mixed up their defence, so they went more. It seemed to me more of a back four, and then also bringing in Traore, they got him to start the game. He's such a threat, the way he can run at players, and I definitely thought it made the difference. It started opening up gaps in the Arsenal defence. And you're always going to be scared of him running at you every time he gets the ball. I don't care which team you are. You could be Real Madrid, you could be Barcelona, you could be Bayern Munich. Traore running at you, you're going to be worried because that pace, no other player has that pace and brutality about him.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that he's chosen to start Traore against Arsenal, considering that, if you think of teams in the Premier League that have got strong defenders and, strong midfield that are going to be able to tackle someone like Traore, Arsenal are probably one of the lowest teams on that list that you'd look at. So it was the perfect game for him. And he caused them a lot of trouble. And even when he's not creating things himself, he's always going to be in the back of the mind of the Arsenal defenders. They're going to be wondering where he is, looking over their shoulder, looking for him. So yeah, he did what he was asked to do. He caused chaos. He made it really difficult for them. And it was definitely a good decision to bring him in for this game.
Yeah, just a question on Wolves to both of you. I imagine Raul Jimenez is going to be out for the season now. I've never seen anyone recover too quickly from an injury like this one. Does this increase the pressure on Wolves? And in terms of Fabio Silva as well, we saw him come on in this game, but do you think he's going to be an able replacement for Jimenez?
The honest answer from me is I really don't know. I've not seen enough of Fabio Silva to really know whether he's got what it takes to lead the line for a Premier League club. What I do know, I think, is that he went off again in this game after coming on early on, obviously, to replace Jimenez. He then got subbed off again, which doesn't happen all that often. Maybe that's more down to fitness, but does it also maybe suggest that Nuno's not necessarily fully happy with him and convinced that he is the right person for the job?
Yeah, I think he's certainly going to struggle to lead the line. They put a lot of money into such a young player, and he's not been massively proven in Portugal. And I think he's not ready for the step up into the Premier League, especially to step into the boots of a player who's been so prolific as Jimenez. I think they'd be better off putting Podence to run the line. I think he's an incredible player, the way he can dribble the ball, the way he can get past players, and then have Neto and Traore on either side of him. I think that was still a very exciting front three.
Yeah, definitely. I think they have an abundance of attacking options, but I really do hope for Wolves' sake that Fabio Silva is that guy, because they spent a lot of money on him, and if he does come good this season, that almost relieves the pressure that they might have at the end of the season when they're in a situation perhaps where Raul Jimenez still isn't fit. So it'll be interesting to see where Wolves go from here, because at the moment they're really climbing up the league and they look impressive in most of the games that they play.
I guess the other thing to be looking at is we're now only a month away, literally a month today, from the next transfer window. And if it is as serious as it looks, Silva has a month now to prove his worth, prove that he can get goals. If not, there are players who could come in and do the job, I think. I think one of them is at Chelsea, who we spoke about him earlier. He's not been in the best of form, but I think Oliver Giroud coming in, he wants to get his place in the Euros. And I think he could be a really astute signing for them, especially if they could get him on like a loan until the summer. I think he could be the man who could lead that line for Wolves really well. And he might, if they could get the word out, he might push for that signing.
Yeah, it's a great shout, actually, but he doesn't speak Portuguese, so it doesn't seem likely.
Flawed. Maybe Ronaldo on the loan.
That probably would be a better option, to be honest. Right, next up we had Leicester-Fulham, a game we expected to go very much one way, with Leicester in good form and Fulham in pretty poor form, but Yeah, it was a turn up for the books, and Fulham came away with a really, really important away win, and a win I don't think anybody saw coming. I'd be very surprised if anyone predicted that. But they were 2-0 up at half time, and yeah, I was shocked. But it was a really good performance from Fulham, and I think this new setup they have, playing 5 at the back and then a flat 4 midfield of just one striker, has worked really well. It helped neutralise everything that Leicester threw at them, and I think this might be the way forward for Fulham, just playing a very almost calculated approach where they don't rely too much on their attacking threat, and then when the goals do come, you sit back on them, and it worked well for this one. And I did expect Leicester to come out after half time and give Fulham a good go, but Fulham stood tall, and it was impressive.
Once Fulham went 2-0 up, I started wondering whether we should have really seen this coming a bit more, which sounds like a weird thing to say, and obviously it's easier to say in hindsight, but looking back at their game against Everton, where, yes, Everton got the win there, but Fulham really rallied and had a really good go at getting back into that game. And if it weren't for a missed penalty in that game, they probably would have got a point from that. So they had shown some signs of, picking up a bit of form and potentially being able to get some points. I definitely didn't expect it to come against Leicester, though. However, in the first half, I thought Fulham were excellent. I thought Leicester really looked poor going forward, but the chances that Fulham had, they took excellently. The build-up play and the goal that Lookman scored early on was fantastic. And then the penalty was just very clever play by the attacker to just get to the ball, knock it past and draw the foul from the goalkeeper. You're almost thinking, well, maybe it's not that clever play with the way Fulham have been taking their penalties this season, but fair play to Cavaliero, who stepped up and scored, got their penalty that almost they needed that to sort of get over the whole feeling of we're never going to score one. And now that they've got it, this is going to be a massive confidence for Fulham, who are also now going to be looking and going, well, we're out of the relegation zone now. Sheffield United, you can almost forget about. Burnley are looking really poor in terms of goal scoring. And then West Brom are the team that I almost feel if you're going to make early calls now, you'd say West Brom and Fulham were the two that are sort of going to be fighting over that other spot. It never quite plays out like that over the course of the season, does it? But at the moment, that you'd feel Fulham will be looking at it now after those 3 points and thinking, maybe we do actually have a chance of staying up this year if we can get some more results like that.
Yeah, I was impressed with Fulham in this game. They've really stepped up after such a difficult start to the season where they've been a mixture of unlucky and some horrific penalties. This is a result which was much needed and must give them a huge confidence boost because, like we've said throughout the season, Leicester have looked fantastic at times. They spanked Man City early in the season. They've had some big results and then they just didn't turn up. And Fulham, one of the reasons why they didn't turn up, their performance was brilliant, especially I thought in the middle of the park. I thought Harrison Reed did a really good job. Anguissa did a really good job. They were really combative in the midfield and held up a lot of the play for Leicester and stopped them being able to get into the flowing style they often can do.
Yeah, one of the more interesting things as well that comes out of this game is that Fulham showed that they're capable of winning games without, Mitrovic, who was their star man for, the last 3-4 years. He's in the last time they're in the Premier League, he scored all of their goals. This time, it doesn't look like it's going to be the same case. If anything, I think he might struggle to get back into the team now. We've seen Cavaliero lead the line in this game effectively, score his penalty. And, I don't think Mitrovic is going to be particularly happy being benched. So I think it's going to take a lot of man management from Scott Parker to keep this team running to the same level that it has done so far. But yeah, look at this result isolated, and it's a really, really good result for Fulham. And yeah, who knows how high they could go now with this run of form they've got going.
The other person I'd like to credit is Lookman. To come back after such an appalling penalty, which cost his team, it took a lot of guts. And I think he really deserves all the adulation which he should receive because he's stepped up to the mark. He's at times looked fantastic for Fulham this season, and it would have been very easy after that miss to let it get him down, struggle, possibly even try and hide away from the ball in the game. Whereas, yet again, he was one of the key players for this Fulham side, and if anything, he might be the talisman which at the start of the season we thought Mitrovic was going to be for them, because he's definitely seeming to be their most creative player, almost in the way that Wilfried Zaha is for Crystal Palace.
Okay, so moving on to our final game of the weekend, one that seemed like it took forever to come for me. West Ham hosted Aston Villa. West Ham off the back of 2 straight wins, 2 1-0 wins. Aston Villa off the back of just a really good start to the season as well. So it was a really interesting game to see who would come out on top. West Ham came away with the 3 points with the 2-1 win. I have to say, as I said last night, and I say again now, I think West Ham were fortunate to come away with the win. I think Aston Villa, for the majority of the game, were the better team. They definitely had the most chances, definitely had the most creativity, and really looked like they were going to come away with the points. But those are the games where, if you can get the 3 points without looking like you deserve to, those are the nice ones to win every now and then in the season. My biggest takeaway from the game was not the VAR decisions and was not the missed penalty. For me, I just found it really, really frustrating watching Jack Grealish, seeing how amazing he is, how incredibly talented he is, and then seeing how he just throws himself on the floor at every opportunity. He must be one of the most frustrating players to watch ever, especially when you're playing against him and you can see how great he is. And I think it just really tarnishes his game. I'd be interested to see what you guys think, having seen it and not had the sort of emotion of being a fan for the other team watching it. But for me, it was just a real sort of blemish on the game, the way he just sort of dived on at least 2 or 3 occasions from what I could see.
Yeah, I'll get to Grealish in a minute, but I thought fortunate to win from a West Ham point of view is very, very generous. I thought you were really, really bloody lucky to win this game. You had 2 shots on target, you scored them both, and then you compare that to Aston Villa, who had 7 shots on target, a VAR goal ruled out, a missed penalty, and how the scoreline ended up 2-1, I'm not too sure. But what I will say is that this new West Ham defence is doing its job, and it was a good performance from West Ham. But at the same time, you look at this Aston Villa team, and again, they're surprising a lot of people this season. And Jack Grealish, I guess, isn't surprising anyone. But like you said earlier, I think he does let himself down when he is chucking himself to the ground. And his latest one in this game, which you've seen, has become a meme. It was that bad. You see it compared to other things in the world, and like other people getting hurt. We saw in the F1, we saw in boxing this weekend, and you look at Jack Grealish, who's being almost pushed very, very lightly, and he's falling to the ground like he's been shot. It's embarrassing, and I don't think he would be happy seeing himself react like that. Whether he's getting any advice from his manager to do it, I'm not too sure, but it is a bad look for him, especially with a player of so much talent who doesn't need to rely on theatrics to get into a good position or to get win penalties. And yeah, I guess as an Aston Villa fan, you'd be disappointed that he's trying to do that, because he's probably more talented with the ball at his feet than he is flailing to the ground. But again, yeah, I do feel like West Ham were very lucky to win this game. And if it wasn't for a missed penalty by Ollie Watkins and then a very, very, very debatable VAR call at the very end, I think, it could have easily gone the other way, and you could have seen Aston Villa winning this game 3-2. But yeah, I guess that's football.
Yeah, like Matt said, jammy bastards. But it happens, and you have to stay in the game to get the result, and you did really well to do it in the end. In terms of Jack Grealish, it's just frustrating, isn't it? Because it's, like you both said, bags and bags of talent. He's one of the only players in the league who, week in, week out, I want to watch play. Because when he has a ball, he's in a different planet at times. He can dribble, he can go past players. He's brave in the way he does it. He'll pick it up from anywhere on the pitch. He's not afraid. He backs his talent throughout. And then you see him doing some of this. Yes, he is foul. He is kicked about left, right, and centre quite often in a match. And understandably so, because he's so good at dribbling. Sometimes that's your only option. You have to be a bit smart about it. There's often a complaint Matt and I had about Southampton, is that we weren't smart in the way we did stuff. Several seasons ago, if we came up against Grealish, we'd have just opened the door and gone, "In you go, Jack. Go get yourself a goal." Whereas here, he was just disgraceful at times. A player, like you both said, a player of such fantastic talent doesn't need to be throwing himself to the pitch. And hopefully he's seen some of the memes, and hopefully he's seen that people are kind of taking the piss. And he seems to me the type of guy who might take it a little bit to the heart, like possibly affect his ego a little bit. And hopefully he goes, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. Next time I'll be a little bit more serious in the way I play.
Unfortunately, I think his personality is exactly the opposite. I think he's one of those people who's very comfortable doing something until he gets either reprimanded for it or something serious comes of it. Unfortunately, I'm going to take this back to some of the driving offences that he's had recently. Apparently, he's been pulled over 4 or 5 times this year for dangerous driving, either on the way to the training grounds, or I remember one of the more notable ones was during lockdown. He was caught driving somewhere, and it's obviously something that he's been told not to do, told and warned about, but he continues to do it because obviously that's what he feels like doing. So he's probably going to keep diving around because that's what he feels like doing. And at the end of the day, these ones that get caught on camera, yes, they look bad, but over the course of a match, he probably does it like 7 or 8 times and they'll get attacking position out of it. So as bad as it looks, and the memes that are created, I think if you're an Aston Villa fan, you'd probably encourage him to keep doing it because it puts you in a position where you're likely to score. And, it might end up being a positive for you. But yeah, it's a bad look on him and it's a bad look on Aston Villa, really.
See, I'm not sure I agree. If I'm an Aston Villa fan, I think I'm looking at it thinking, we've seen what you can do when you're on the edge of the box with the ball at your feet. Just do that. Don't throw yourself on the floor, because Aston Villa look more like they're likely to score from open play than they do from set pieces at the moment. So I'd rather Grealish dribbles the ball past 3 defenders and goes into the box if I'm one of their fans, rather than getting the ball on the edge of the box and Douglas Luiz, Grealish and Trezeguet will have an argument over who's going to hit it, and in the end it goes into the stands. We had a moment right at the end of the match last night where Grealish looked like he was going absolutely nowhere, did a incredible little turn and took 3 of our defenders out of the picture, and realistically Villa should have scored from it. That's what he should be doing every time he's got the ball. And I think if I was a Villa fan, I'd be getting really frustrated that he chooses not to do that and instead goes the easy route of throwing himself down.
Yeah, I just want to caveat what I said by saying I'm not an Aston Villa fan and I don't condone what he does.
If he came and played for Saints, though, he can do it a lot more often, because with James Ward-Prowse on the edge of the box. So maybe for England, maybe he can do it. That could be the ultimate tactic. Grealish, get to the edge of the box, trip over, James Ward-Prowse, step up.
If you're listening, Gareth Southgate will win the Euros. That'd be lovely. All right, so one of the main talking points from this weekend, again, unfortunately, was VAR and how it was implemented in a couple of the games this weekend. We saw in the Brighton game in particular, it was used more than once in very controversial circumstances. We saw Salah be ruled offside by what was an incredibly narrow margin. And then at the end, we saw Danny Welbeck's penalty, obviously. I guess from a VAR point of view, we are seeing more controversial calls in terms of offsides. And we saw that again with Aston Villa's late equaliser ruled out against West Ham. And it's something that's becoming almost commonplace now in the Premier League. Every week we're seeing goals ruled out by either an elbow or what is less than almost, like 30 centimetres. And at this point, I think it, could definitely be either changed or wound in a bit, because we've seen in other countries, actually, especially the Eredivisie, we've seen how they are actually going against what FIFA want to happen in football leagues and doing it their own way. And they've brought in a system whereby they use the same system in that you can't be offside, but they give you a lot more leeway. So they give you 10 centimetres either way to kind of give the attacker a bit more benefit of the doubt, which is something that in the past had been used in the Premier League. But I think it's something that would obviously be conducive to more goals standing and less talking points, because it's a rule that seems to almost negate what VAR has become in the Premier League, and it has become a bit of a hindrance in terms of attacking play. So it's controversial, and I think it would be very, very difficult to change halfway through a season. But for next season, I think maybe something where there's a little more margin for error for both attacking and defending teams.
Yeah, it's almost sort of applying the clear and obvious element to offsides, which we've not seen so far. We've seen that with penalties where decisions don't get turned over unless it's a clear and obvious error. So I guess the idea that they've got is trying to apply the same to the offside rule, which it seems like a logical idea. It seems sensible. I did see one counter argument to it earlier today, was an example of where a goal was scored and was ruled offside by the linesman on the pitch. It went to VAR. The lines that VAR drew clearly showed that the player was actually onside. However, because it was within that 10 centimetre margin for error, it wasn't deemed to be a clear and obvious error. And therefore, even though we could all see that it actually was onside, the VAR couldn't overturn the decision. And therefore, a legitimate goal was ruled out even with the use of VAR. So it's not a perfect solution. And I don't think, to be fair, I don't think anyone's claiming it's a perfect solution. But I do think it would add more sense to some of the decisions that we're seeing. And I think it would be just more palatable for your average armchair supporter to look at it and go, well, I can see the logic behind that. Whereas some of them, where the decisions are so close, you can't even really tell, even when they zoom into the minute detail, you can't tell whether someone's offside or not. At least with this, you've got something that's a bit easier to understand.
Margin and error point I really like, and I think it also comes up with the point, when does a ball actually leave the player's foot? Like, how accurate are our cameras? Are we getting it? And I think this just gives the whole system just that a little bit more flex. I've spoken about it several times, the spirit of the game. I think this is much more in terms of that. And in my eyes, it should always be in the favour of the attacker. So that would then solve that issue of if the decision has been given as offside, but he was clearly onside, and the lines, but because the lines touch, I think that it should still be overturned. I think if the lines are touching, it's a goal.
Actually, just on that, I didn't mention it earlier, but I would love to get Peter's standpoint on what was an offside VAR call in the West Ham game, but actually could have easily been a penalty as well. I saw something in the news this morning where on TalkSport they were saying whilst it was offside by the letter of the law, Ogbonna's hands were all over Watkins, and if anything, if it was offside, then it's a penalty because his hands were all over him, and regardless of whether he was offside or not, he was prevented from getting to the ball. So I can kind of see that argument as well. So I don't know whether that's something that needs to be factored into this VAR thing as well. But to me, it was more of a penalty than it was offside.
Yeah, I think in principle, I agree with you. It looked like it should really have been a penalty. I wonder if Watkins misses that shot or the shot is saved, do VAR then give a penalty because they spend the time focusing on whether it's a penalty or not rather than trying to establish whether the goal needs to be allowed or not? I think because he scored, it then meant that their focus was immediately, does the goal stand? And they were almost looking so much into that maybe they didn't look at the penalty side of things. Two other points on that. One is that there was a decision down the other end where one of the Villa players was absolutely all over Sebastian Haller at one point and wrestled him to the ground and stopped him from getting to the ball. And from what I can tell, VAR didn't even mention it to the referee. It never got looked at. In my opinion, it should have been looked at. So if you're looking at it that way, then maybe it balances itself out. The other thing you've got to look at as well is the incident we had a couple of weeks ago with Harry Maguire, arms all over an attacker, arms around his neck, completely stopped him from jumping and getting to the ball, and that wasn't given as a penalty either. So, you know, I'm not entirely sure what the rules of the game are, whether that should have been given, shouldn't have been given, but there's been a couple of instances that suggest that maybe they're not giving penalties for things like that. I don't know. It's bizarre. Realistically, if I look at it from an unbiased point of view, yes, it should have been a penalty.
The problem is, like you said, no one seems to know what is a penalty and what isn't a penalty anymore, and that's almost the problem with VAR in itself. Something that marred this weekend, unfortunately, was the injury of Raul Jimenez we saw in the Wolves-Arsenal game. And it's something you hate to see in football, really, something that was unpreventable, two players going up to win a header, and unfortunately, rather than get the ball, they hit each other with their heads, and obviously Raul Jimenez came off way worse than David Luiz in this one and has injured himself really, really badly, and a fractured skull is something we've seen players in the past not come back from. Ryan Mason's the example I'm talking about, who had a similar problem when he was at Hull City and had to retire from football early. So I think people for a long time have kind of glossed over concussion in football, and they don't see it as being a big deal. But I think we're starting to see it happen so often now with players who are allowed to come back on the pitch with a serious head injury that, you know, concussion and the protocol surrounding it just is non-existent in the Premier League. And you see it in other sports, especially the NFL, you know, players who are, you know, withstanding pretty heavy hits, and they're having to go off and be well tested to make sure they are in a well enough state to come back to the pitch. Whereas David Luiz, who was also injured in this collision, was sent off the pitch, had his head wrapped, and within 2 or 3 minutes he was back on the pitch, you know, like going in for headers, and eventually he had to come off at half time. But, you know, I think the whole protocol surrounding concussion really needs to be looked at by the Premier League.
Yeah, I find it almost scary that we still aren't seeing any action taking place. Each year it seems to be mentioned. I can remember De Lloris a few seasons ago. He was concussed. He came back on the pitch, and he's since come out in an interview and said he can't remember even being back on the pitch and playing. That should have been a wake-up call for the FA and the Premier League to sort their act out, and they haven't. This is still going on. Players are coming on with severe injuries, head concussions. We're losing legends to dementia and other long-term effects from different types of injuries which you can get from heading the ball and concussions such as this. And for David Luiz to come back on is ridiculous. They need to be looking into a similar system to rugby. I don't know so much about the NFL in terms of concussion, but rugby, if you have a head injury, you can have head injury subs. So they come off, they go get the heads checked, they go down in, see the doctor, then they come back on. It could be 10 minutes later, it could be 20 minutes later, or it might not happen at all. But that doesn't affect the amount of subs you have in the game. In football, you'd still have 3 subs to make. That would just be a separate one to deal with head concussions.
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer of a decision, really, doesn't it? And it does make you wonder why we haven't brought something like that in yet. I think with the David Luiz situation, almost for me, there's questions to be asked about why he was allowed to come back on the pitch, even without those protocols. It may be a dangerous thing to say, but did the Arsenal medical team really have the right decision-making process there? Did they have his best interests at heart when they sent him back onto the pitch? Because there's no way in the 3 minutes that he was off, or the 4 minutes that he was off, that they were able to carry out the right assessments to determine whether or not he had suffered a concussion there. So realistically, if there's any bit of doubt there, surely you've got to go with making sure the player is safe, and you take them off. There shouldn't be if he might be okay, we could do without losing him because we might lose the game. It should just be about the safety of the player. We've just seen a horrific injury to Jimenez. Why are we sending someone back onto the pitch that could potentially also be in quite significant trouble with having suffered a collision like that to his head? It just doesn't make sense to me at all.
No, not at all. And football's the biggest sport watched globally, and it's the only sport which doesn't have designated concussion protocols, really. You see it in rugby, you see it in American football, you see it in all other physical contact sports, that if someone is concussed, they come off the pitch and they are looked after until they are deemed well enough either to return or not to return to the pitch. And the fact that football haven't brought in something like this already is shocking, not only because it's been a problem for so long, but because every other sport's doing it. So why can't they just follow suit? It doesn't make any sense. And we're losing players like we saw with Jimenez. Yes, there was nothing that really could have been prevented with the injury, but David Luiz should never have been allowed back on the pitch in this match. He was bleeding, evidently bleeding throughout the first half, even with the bandage. And there's no way, if you're gushing blood from your head, you are in the right headspace to be continuing to play, and especially as a defender where you're going to be going into physical battles with strikers. It doesn't make any sense, and it almost makes a mockery of the sport, really, because at this point you would have thought, in the day and age that we're in, something like this would have been covered and made sure it doesn't happen, and nothing's been done for some time now. Right, let's do our predictions for the upcoming game week 11 in the Premier League. Unfortunately, it's not going to be starting on Friday like we all thought it would, because Newcastle, unfortunately, have a COVID outbreak at their training ground, so their match against Aston Villa has been postponed, meaning the Premier League will now start on Saturday with a nice early kickoff, 12:30, Burnley-Everton. Tough game to call, really, because Everton have been on the decline in recent weeks, and Burnley have shown some signs of life before that 5-0 thrashing at City. But I do back Burnley at home, and it's probably a bit of a weird prediction, but if anything, I fancy them to be favourites in this game, and I do think they're going to be able to do just about enough to get a win over Everton. I really didn't think I'd be predicting this a couple of weeks ago, but I think Burnley might just grind out a 1-0.
I can't see Burnley picking up points here. I think Everton, at some point, they're going to return to form, and this could be a really good opportunity for it. Burnley will let them play their football, and I think James Rodriguez, if given the time, the space, if he can recapture some of his early season flow to his game, that will get Everton over the line. I think I'm going to go for 2-0 win for Everton.
Yeah, I really struggled with this one. I almost wanted to go the same way as you, Matt, with Burnley to win at home. Partially because I just feel like Turf Moor is one of those places that teams like Everton that do play a flowing style of football really struggle to play at. It's quite a narrow pitch. The dimensions of the pitch might not be that much different to any other grounds, but because the stands are so close to the pitch, it almost feels tighter, and I think that kind of makes it harder to play, as weird as that might sound. I've gone for a 1-1 scoreline in this one, because I can definitely see Everton struggling a bit more than some people might think they will. But it is a really tough one to call. I changed my mind on this one about 3 times whilst writing my predictions, so I'm not too confident in my prediction on this one.
Okay, next up we have the team that smashed Burnley last weekend, Man City, facing Fulham, another team who got a good result last weekend, but I can't see that continuing in this game. Man City at home, I think now for the rest of the season, maybe not against the top teams, but definitely against the lower half, they're probably just going to brush them away, and I don't see that being any different. Yes, Fulham picked up a good result last weekend, but Burnley did as well coming into this game, and I don't think Fulham are going to be able to do the same. So, similar to the weekend we've just had, I'm going to go for Man City 4, Fulham 0.
Yeah, very similar. I've gone for Man City 3, Fulham 0. I don't think Fulham will play terribly, but I do just think City are picking up some form. They'll have a bit too much for them.
I also think it's going to be a Man City win, so it's a clean sweep across the board. I'm going with a 4-1 to Man City. I think Fulham should be able to get a goal, but it's not going to be enough.
You don't want to go 0-0 again?
Nope. I've made that mistake. That's not happening again. If it happens now, I'll cry.
Okay, next up we have West Ham versus Manchester United. Again, we saw just how good Manchester United are away from home against Southampton. Yes, they didn't turn up in the first half, but they still did enough in the second to get the win. As well as West Ham have played recently, I just don't see them being able to get a result against United. I think they're starting to build up, not necessarily impressive form, but form nevertheless. And I do think Cavani could play a really big part in this game. If he starts, I think he'll give West Ham a whole bunch of trouble. But whether he will or not, because we've seen what Ollie's like with his team selection, I'm not sure. But if he does start, I do back them to get the win. So yeah, I'm just going to go 2-1 Manchester United.
This is one of the results this week I really struggled over. But I'm going to go with also United win. I'm going to go with a 2-1 win for United. I think they should have just enough to win this game, especially, like I said, if I think Cavani should start. I think he now needs to just put the faith in him and go for it.
Yeah, I mean, we've done well the last 3 games, but the odds on us winning 4 games in a row are pretty slim. So I can't see us getting a win in this one. I do think we'll score. We've only failed to score in 1 game so far this season, so I think we'll carry on with that trend. But I'm going to go for a 2-1 win to Man United as well.
That must be the first time this season where we've all agreed on a result.
Which almost guarantees that it won't come true. Moving on to the next game, Stamford Bridge, Chelsea host Leeds in another classic example of what would have been an amazing game with fans. Chelsea on some really good form. Leeds picking up some decent form as well, with especially defensively. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of goals in this game, which again probably means there'll be loads. But I'm going with Chelsea to win this one 2-1.
Yeah, I thought pretty similarly to you. As impressive as Leeds were last weekend against Everton, I don't really see how that's going to translate against this Chelsea team, who are so much stronger defensively than Everton. For that reason, I'm going for a Chelsea 2-0 win. I don't see where the goals are going to come against this Chelsea defence at the moment.
I think Chelsea are just going to have too much for Leeds in this game. I don't think Leeds have enough to break down that Chelsea defence. They're looking far too strong for them. And I think it'll be a pretty comfortable 2-0 win.
Okay, moving on to probably the least enticing game of the weekend on Sunday, West Brom versus Crystal Palace. Neither team played particularly attractive football. It's difficult to say which way this one's going to go, but you've got to urge probably on the side of West Brom after last weekend. I thought they played pretty well to get the better of Sheffield United and Crystal Palace. Whether they'll have Zaha back or not, I don't know, but I think there's one stat that suggests that I don't think they've won their last 7 without Zaha, so without him, they're half the team they are with him. So for that reason, I've got to go with a West Brom win. So I'm just going to go for a narrow 1-0 again.
I've gone with a 0-0 in this game. I have to predict one every week, and it tends to be the game that West Brom are involved in, or Sheffield United are involved in. So this week it's West Brom's turn. Definitely without Zaha, I can't see Palace scoring, and West Brom haven't been the most attacking team or the most flowing team so far. So yeah.
The chance of this being a great match is slim, I'd say. Slim at best. I was going to go with 1-0 to West Brom as well, but I don't want to sound like I'm copying Matt through every match. So instead, I'm going to go with a crazy 2-0 win for West Brom. I think they I hope they have enough to get this match. I think they should do.
Okay, so up next we've got Sheffield United taking on Leicester. Leicester off the back of a really disappointing result for them against Fulham. I think they'll bounce back from it. I'm just going to go with more doom for Sheffield, I'm afraid, and it's going to be 3-0 to Leicester.
It's difficult to see where these points are going to come from for Sheffield United. And Leicester coming off that poor performance against Fulham, you would think that Brendan Rodgers will probably get them up for this one, especially against Sheffield United. And yeah, I reckon a return to form for Leicester, so I'm going to go 3-1.
And again, to make it a clean sweep of Leicester wins, I think it's going to be really comfortable for them. I don't see how Sheffield United have the attacking threat to even worry this Leicester side, so I'm going to go with a comfortable 2-0 win for Leicester. Moving on to the North London derby, probably on paper the fixture of the weekend, although personally I'm not sure it's going to be as good as we'd hope. Saying that, I have gone for a 3-1 win for them. I don't think Arteta has the managerial experience to take on Jose Mourinho in this match.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Tottenham are going to get the better of Arsenal in this one. I've gone for a 3-2 scoreline though. These games tend to provide quite a lot of goals, and whilst Arsenal have been very poor this season, I do see them. I'm actually going to throw in an extra caveat to this prediction and say that Tottenham get a red card whilst leading, which lets Arsenal back into the game, but Tottenham just hang on for the 3-2.
I've gone for a result that pains me to say it, to be honest, because I've got a lot more Arsenal fan friends than I have Tottenham fan friends, but I've gone for a 4-0 Tottenham win in this one. I can see them just running riot a bit and making Arsenal's lives a bit miserable here. I could be completely wrong with this. It's one of those games. I was having this chat with somebody the other day. It's one of those games you just never know. You never know what's going to happen in these. You could think it's definitely going to go one way and it would just completely surprise you. So I'm quite excited by this one. Even if the game's terrible, it would just be interesting to see which way it swings. And then moving on to Liverpool, who are hosting Wolves. I've just gone for a fairly standard Liverpool 3-1 win. I think Liverpool are probably doing better than a lot of people thought they would through this injury crisis, and I think they will come out the other side doing well in this one. They've had the benefit again. They've played midweek, but they've played Tuesday this time, so they've got a bit more time to prepare for this one. And I think they'll have a bit too much for Wolves.
I also think this is going to be a Liverpool win. I don't think it's going to be particularly comfortable, but I think Wolves missing Jimenez, which surely they will be, are going to struggle to break down even a weakened Liverpool defence. So I'm going to go for 2-1 win for Liverpool.
Interesting. Now I'm going to break the mould in this one. I think this injury to Jimenez is kind of going to spur Wolves on a little bit. Obviously, it is very much reliant on Fabio Silva to turn up for Wolves, but whether he does or not, I do think Wolves are going to dig in this game. And we've seen already that Liverpool have been somewhat fortunate to get results in their recent weeks. And I think they're actually going to draw this game again. I think Wolves could get a point out of it. So I'm going to go for a 1-1.
And then the final game of the weekend, Brighton Saints. This is not a derby. And I refuse to believe anybody who, no matter how much Sky Sports might try and plug it as one, it's definitely not a derby. Nonetheless, I still like to beat them. And I think it's going to be a 2-1 Saints win.
Yeah, it's definitely not a derby in my eyes. Brighton can stick to their M23 derby at Crystal Palace. It's an interesting game for both sides. Brighton have obviously picked up some form lately, got a good draw against Liverpool, and obviously we're coming off that United's result, so you'd hope that we can bounce back. This is probably quite optimistic in a prediction, but I'm actually going to go for a 1-0 Southampton win and hope that we pick up the 3 points on the road.
Yeah, okay, I'm going for a Southampton win in this as well. I do think you've definitely got too much for Brighton in this. I don't think it'll be a very big victory, so I've gone with 2-1 to Southampton.
And I think the big thing to talk about is these fixtures are going to be some of the first ones to have fans in. The Brighton game, they've already sold their 2,000 tickets for the Brighton against Southampton, so there will be a crowd in this. How much 2,000 Brighton fans will make a noise, I severely doubt any whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to find out whether I'm going to be going off to watch West Ham at the weekend. I have a feeling I would have heard by now if I was going to get a ticket for it, so I'm not holding my breath. But yeah, I think if Brighton fans are going to struggle to make noise in their stadium, imagine how much West Ham fans are going to struggle to make noise in our crater of a stadium. So maybe the fans won't have as much of an impact as some people seem to think they will.
All right, and that brings an end to this episode of the 3PL podcast. Again, a big thank you to everyone out there who takes some time out of their week to listen to us. We'll be back next week again covering all the action from game week 11 of the Premier League. But before we sign off, we'd like to announce the winner of our giveaway. So the winner of our giveaway of Football Manager 2021 came from Instagram, and the username was @didnotcash, who correctly commented Makeda. So we'll be in touch to help you claim your prize, and congratulations. A big thank you again to everyone for tuning in. Hopefully we can run some more giveaways in the future that you can all be a part of. But in the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media at 3PL Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And also make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss an episode. And we'll catch you all again next week.